Grace to you and peace from God our Creator and Christ our Redeemer. Please be seated. The tricky thing about conventional wisdom is that it is not necessarily true. In fact, one could argue that it is often wrong. What's more, it's very sticky. Conventional wisdom is hard to dispel. However, the most troubling part of conventional wisdom is that we rarely question it. After all, why would we examine and pick apart something that everyone knows to be true? Conventional wisdom clouds the world around us, hiding complexity and nuance from our sight and obscuring truth. For example, conventional wisdom tells us that Christopher Columbus set out on his voyage to the New World in order to prove that the earth was round to a world that believed it was still flat. But the truth is that the earth was first imagined to be round in the 6th century BC, and by Columbus's day, it was widely accepted knowledge that the world was not flat. But conventional wisdom is hard to beat. I know that I was taught that Columbus proved that the world was round. Now, I don't know if he's held up in the same way here in Canada as he is in the United States, but raise your hand if you were taught the same thing. Conventional wisdom also gets in our way as we read this morning's gospel. Jesus has commanded his disciples to leave him and to go ahead across the sea to their next destination as he disperses the great crowds fed by the 5 loaves and the 2 fish. The disciples obey his orders, but are quickly overtaken by a storm at sea, battered by wind and rain. They struggle through the night against the storm, and as dawn draws near, they see a terrifying sight, a figure walking out over the water toward them. Greatly frightened by the sight, the disciples hear Jesus' voice call out to them, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." Peter responds out of joy or relief or fear and calls out to Jesus, "Let me come out to you," before stepping out on the water toward Jesus. For a while, it seems to be going well, but then it starts to dawn on Peter what it is he is doing, and the precariousness of the situation sinks in as he takes notice of the wind that still rages around him, and suddenly Peter finds himself slowly slipping into the waves and into the inky depths beneath him. Far from the boat now, the storm still tossing around him, Peter cries out with fear. Stretching out his hand in one last panicked effort, Peter grasps after Jesus, who extends his hand and catches him. Conventional wisdom tells us that this story is about keeping your eyes on Jesus. Generations of well-intentioned and earnest preachers have perpetuated this interpretation so that the story of walking on water is synonymous in our minds with having enough faith. Just keep your eyes on the Lord and you can weather any storm. Just keep your eyes on the Lord. The trouble with this interpretation is that sometimes it's really hard. Life is distracting, and not in a shiny object sort of way. The realities of the world and our own existence pull at our focus. Disease, love, heartbreak, loss, fear, jobs, children, all demand our energy and compete with Christ for our attention. As a result, when we feel ourselves sinking up to our ears while the storm blows all around us, we feel it is our fault. If we fail, it is our fault because we let ourselves be distracted. If this is our only interpretation, then it leaves us with guilt because we were not able to just keep our eyes on the Lord. Conventional wisdom tells us to tisk and pity for poor, old, foolish Peter, who leapt headfirst towards Jesus, but just did not have enough faith to see it through. Conventional wisdom tells us to tisk and pity for the people in our lives whom we feel have also failed to just keep their eyes on the Lord. Conventional wisdom tells us to secretly dread the possibility that we might do the same. And as we are distracted with feelings of inadequacy, conventional wisdom quietly hides from our attention other ways of reading this text, interpretations that are perhaps life-giving. One of the surprising things about this story is that in our move to cast judgments on Peter's failure, we overlook the fact that Peter walked on water. Let me say that again. Peter walked on water. Yes, Jesus also walked on water, but we've come to expect that sort of thing from him. Peter, however, is not Jesus. Peter is often stubborn and thick-headed and headstrong, and he walked on water. Please raise your hands if you've ever walked on water. I certainly have not. At least part of the good news of this story is that we can do amazing things. We chronically undersell ourselves, tending to think that we can do nothing remarkable unless we are Christ. What this passage reminds us is that just as Jesus called Peter out of the boat to meet him on the water, so too does God call us out to do wonderful and audacious things. I often talk about how God is at work in the world and that God works through us, but that is not a case of making lemonade out of lemons. We are not a bunch of duds. We're able to do the work of building the kingdom of God, whether it be feeding our neighbors, standing against injustice, caring for the sick and the lonely, because God works through us and we are capable of doing the work. We may not be perfect, and God does wonderful and amazing things through us because we have the capacity to do wonderful and amazing things. Another part of the story that we tend to overlook is what happens at the end. As Peter starts sinking into the waves, he calls out for Jesus, stretches out his hand towards him, and Jesus catches him. This might be the most important part of the good news in today's story. Christ will be with us when we stumble. We are capable of amazing things, and we are not perfect. There will be times when we fail and fall short as we strive to do wonderful things. In fact, there will be times when we fail and fall short as we strive to do even mediocre things. However, in all things, Christ is with us. And when we stumble and fall, Christ is still with us, still catching us, still lifting us back up. Conventional wisdom tells us that Peter did not have enough faith, but I think that the measure of Peter's faith was not his failure to stay atop the waves. It was that he knew and trusted that Jesus would be there to catch him as he sank. My friends, God is calling us to be amazing and to do wonderful things as we pursue after Christ. But don't listen to the conventional wisdom. The measure of your faith is not whether you succeed, but that when you inevitably fall short, when you begin to feel the waves pulling you down, that you have the peace and the confidence that it is Christ who catches us as we fall.